All right, guys, welcome. So today we're going to be talking about the circulatory system. And this is going to be our first example of looking at an organ system and kind of what that means. So when we talk about the circulatory system, really what we're talking about is the system in your body that's responsible for moving blood and nutrients around. And we're going to talk about that in the context of what we've been talking about. So in the context of cells and tissues and cell types. At least I hope we are. So let's see if I can get this going. All right. So here we go. You should have a copy of this note. And I'll just remind you that recall that cells undergo mitosis, but then after they undergo mitosis, they specialize. Oh, what just happened there? Sorry about that. So if we start off with just a single happy little cell here, and there he is, and he's got a nucleus, and inside of his nucleus he's got a bunch of DNA. We know that that cell can undergo mitosis, and that will give us two daughter cells. So we should get two cells that are fundamentally similar to, or basically identical to, that original cell. But then what happens is that these product cells can then undergo specialization. And specialization means that they are given a specific function and will begin to take on their specific form and specific traits. So this is how a stem cell becomes a muscle cell, for example. And so this top cell could end up forming into a striated muscle cell, or whatever, and it would still have its nucleus and still have its DNA. That is the world's worst drawing of a muscle cell ever, but that's all right. And maybe this cell down here specializes and becomes, a dendritic cell, and everything that includes with it. And we're not going to worry too much about my artistic skills because, well, they're abysmal. But so we could get here a nerve cell. And that would be there. Now, you wouldn't actually have these coming from the stem cell at one thing, but you get the idea that it's after mitosis we get specialization, and the main takeaway here is that they are designed to fit a specific function. Versus the cell we started off, which is a stem cell, which is unspecialized, and thus has no specific function that it is designed to achieve, except to undergo mitosis and to reproduce. And if you remember, we said that once you have cells reproduced, these form tissues. And if you recall, there are four main types of tissues, four main types of cells we can get. We can get muscle tissues, nerve tissues. What's the next one? Abdullah. That's exactly right, connective tissue. And Nirvan, you're next to him right there, no doubt. What is the next type of tissue we can get? That's right, epithelial. Oh, you guys are good. So if we put specialized cells together, we start to form these tissues, and these are groups of similarly specialized cells. Similarly specialized cells working together. So a big group of muscle cells all working together would be known as muscle tissue, and a big group of nerve cells working together would be nervous tissue, and so on and so forth. To make an organ, which we're going to be talking about today as we start talking about organ systems, then we're going to have to put a bunch of different tissues together. And today we'll look at one of these examples. We'll look at the heart. But just taking the heart as an example, it's a great example of how a single organ requires several different tissue types working together. So looking at the heart as an example, it requires muscle tissues to pump blood. It requires nerve tissues to control the pumping of blood. So there's a whole portion of the heart that is responsible for controlling the beat. And it requires connective tissues to hold it all together. And finally, it requires epithelial tissues to act as a protective layers. Now, if you take grade 11 biology or study biology in further detail, you'll learn more really about these tissue types, but that gives you sort of a breakdown of how tissues have to work together to form a single organ. And then finally, we said, of course, that an organ system requires more than just one organ. So the heart works in conjunction with blood vessels, and the lungs in the cardiovascular system. And that's just one example. But every organ system is going to involve more than one organ working together. So it requires more than just a heart to work. A heart just pumping on its own wouldn't accomplish much of anything. So that's the kind of context in which we want you to look at today's lesson, which is we are thinking about an organ system as specialized cells forming tissues grouping together to form organs, which are these functional units, and then the organs working together, these functional units working together to form a complete whole that is a system that accomplishes a task. And we're going to briefly learn about a few organ systems in this class. But the cardiovascular system is a good one because it's pretty straightforward and we're pretty good at understanding it. So let's take a look at the circulatory system or the cardiovascular system. There are two terms that are used interchangeably that mean the same thing. And let's talk about what it means, what it looks like. So the circulatory system, which again, you will also see called the cardiovascular system. What's it for? Why do we have a heart? What does it do? What does it accomplish? You probably know this, but, well, you tell me. This is where if I was there, I would wait for one of you to answer. But since I'm not, I'm going to say, Toby, what's it for? And probably you'd say that it is a transportation system. So it's a transportation system that's designed to move nutrients, wastes, hormones, and all sorts of other materials throughout the body. Sorry, I'm just recording a lesson here. How you doing, kiddo? Good. And other materials throughout the body. What organs are involved? We said that an organ system is made up of more than just one organ. And that's true here. Now, the main one is your heart. Your heart is involved, and it acts as the pump. So if you're going to have a transportation system, you need something to actually do the moving, and the heart acts as the pump of the system. Not only that, but it acts as the timing control. In other words, the heart has built into it the components that control not only the physical pumping, but also how quickly or how slowly the pump works. We have blood vessels. What's a blood vessel? Anyone? CJ. Yeah, that's right. Blood vessels are things like your veins and your arteries and your capillaries. These are tubes through which blood flows. Just like in your house, we move water all around the house, and it's copper pipes or PEX pipes and plastic waste drain pipes that move water around. In your body, blood has to flow around, and it's blood vessels through which blood flows. We also have blood, which is an organ. You have to think of blood as an organ because it's a group of cells of a similar type working together. The blood is what? That's right, Lila. Blood is the fluid portion of this system, filled with cells. That flows through the system. And these are the three main components of your circulatory system. Now, I'm going to mention some related organs because these are really the organs of your circulatory system. But your circulatory system wouldn't be much use if it didn't have places to go. So the heart is the pump, the blood vessels are the tubes through which fluid travels, the blood is the fluid itself, but related to that is the places that blood goes. So related to, what is the main place we send blood? And there's two major ones that come to mind. And the first one, I hope, will be obvious, because the one thing that your body needs all the time, the one thing you need a steady, constant flow of, you can't even go a couple minutes without, is oxygen. And your blood is responsible for carrying oxygen all throughout your body. That's actually the major thing that your blood is doing at every minute. And where does it get that oxygen? Yeah, Bria, that's right. In the lungs. To get oxygen. And again, there's lots of other organs that are also involved. But I would say the intestines warrant notice too, because your intestines are also surrounded by blood vessels, and that's to get the nutrients out of the food we eat. Now, there's a million other things related, but just to get a sense that even an organ system isn't really just the organs in that system, it's also the ones that are related to it. Now, we're going to talk about these organs, and we're going to talk in some detail, not a tremendous amount of detail. And if you want a tremendous amount of detail about these, take grade 11 biology because it's really interesting. We'll learn very specifically about your blood and very specifically about your blood vessels and all those good things. We'll keep it kind of slow here. And I'm going to start here talking about the blood vessels themselves. Basically, we've got three: arteries, veins, and capillaries. And arteries are the largest blood vessels. Capillaries are tiny, and veins are smaller than arteries, but still quite big. The walls of an artery are thick and elastic. They can stretch out and then return to their original shape. And that's going to be important to understand when we learn the difference between arteries and veins. And you may not be really aware of the fact that there is a difference between arteries and veins, but there is. It's an important one. And sometimes before you've studied biology, we just kind of use these words interchangeably. You know, a vein or an artery, it's what blood goes in. But they're very different. And the big difference is this: arteries flow away from the heart. Which means they're under high pressure. They're under pressure because they're being pumped directly by the heart. And that's why they have to have these thick and elastic walls. Arteries have thick and elastic walls because as the heart pumps, it squeezes that fluid into arteries, and the arteries have to take that fluid at high pressure and spread out and send it everywhere throughout your body. And you can imagine that to get from your heart to the tip of your pinky finger and to the tip of your toe and up to your brain and everywhere in your body, the heart has to pump pretty hard. And in doing so, it's important that those arteries be thick and strong and elastic so that as the heart beats, they can expand a little, let all the blood through, and then as the heart relaxes, they can relax. But they need to be able to do that over and over again, expand and relax without being damaged and without risking rupturing. So arteries have to have thick and elastic walls. On the other hand, veins return blood to the heart. And that is a low pressure affair. There's no active pump that pumps blood back to the heart. The heart is the pump. So blood makes its way back to the heart just by back pressure from the arteries and by the muscles kind of squeezing, and gravity helps and all these things. But it's a much slower, much low pressure process. Than the blood going out of the heart to the body. And the result of that is that the veins, which are carrying blood back to the heart, do so under a lot less pressure than the arteries, which are carrying blood away. And because of this, they have thinner walls. Still have to be thick enough to avoid being damaged and rupturing, but much thinner than arteries. And finally, you have capillaries. And capillaries are where veins meet arteries. So I'll draw a little diagram of this, and it will amaze you. But if we have the heart here, let me try again. If we have the heart here, there it is, and we have blood leaving in an artery, that artery will go and it will branch through your body, and it will branch out to a few different arteries probably. And if we follow one of those branches, it will branch again because eventually it has to surround every single cell in your body in a tiny little network of blood vessels. And those tiny little blood vessels are called capillaries. And at that spot, that is where they will give up their oxygen to the cell they're at, pick up the CO2 at those cells, and then they'll branch into a vein, and through that vein, they'll make their way back to the heart. So if that's the heart, blood leaves the heart in arteries, it gets to capillaries, and that goes back to the heart in veins. And it's at the capillaries where it gives oxygen to cells, and it picks up anything the cell wants to give away. And that could be CO2, that could be nutrients, that could be anything else. So capillaries are these fine little network of tiny blood vessels. And again, you have capillaries around all the cells of your body, and you have many cells in your body. So these are very small blood vessels. Much smaller than the arteries or the branches of the arteries, which are called arterioles, or the branches of veins called venules, or the veins themselves. The capillaries are very tiny. In fact, their walls are only 1 cell thick. And that 1 cell wall thick is important because this allows things to come and go. So it is the 1 cell thick wall that allows things to enter and exit the capillaries. And the direction of flow, well, is from artery to vein. So the capillaries take the blood from the arteries, they spread them out so they go all around each cell of the body. And then once they've done the exchanging they need to do at every cell, they take that blood and send it back into the veins, which will then take it back to the heart. Because again, arteries take blood from the heart, and veins return it to the heart. All right, so that takes care of blood vessels. Again, this is a pretty quick introduction to this topic. We'll talk about it a bit more in the coming week. We'll talk about it a lot more in grade 11 bio. We're just dipping our toes into it here. But having done that, let's talk about blood itself. And again, we're going to talk about this a lot more in grade 11, but just really quickly, if you were to take a test tube of blood, which we can't do in class because that's a safety hazard, but if it weren't a safety hazard, and if we were allowed to take a test tube of blood and spin it down, we could use a device called a centrifuge. And a centrifuge just takes that test tube and spins it and spins it and spins it really fast. And it spins it so fast that the heavy stuff will move to the bottom of the tube because it holds the test tube out like this and then spins it in a circle. And the result of which, you don't have to draw that, sorry if you did, is that the heaviest stuff in the test tube will make its way to the bottom, and the lightest stuff will make its way to the top. And what you end up with is this big collection of red solid material at the bottom. It's kind of clumpy and chunky. I'm going to try to show some of its clumpy chunkiness if I can. I don't know how effectively that's coming through on video. And then we have this layer of white. And then we have this layer of kind of fluid up on the top that is sort of yellowish in nature. Oh my. Basically like that. And what we're seeing here are the different layers of blood, the different parts of blood. So this is a liquid, and it's called plasma. And if you recall, we said the other day that plasma just means the liquid portion of something. So blood plasma is just the fluid of the blood. So it's the fluid of the blood. It's basically salt water. Which we call a saline solution based, and the stuff dissolved in it. And depending on, all sorts of different things get dissolved in the plasma of the blood. Then we have this white layer, and those are the white blood cells. And we may have mentioned this yesterday when we talked about cancer, but the other word for white blood cells are leukocytes. By the way, if you're a Latin speaker, that literally means white, leuko, and cells, sites, white cells. These are involved in your immune system. So your white blood cells actually go through your body and hunt for cells that don't belong in your body and kills them. And here we have your red blood cells. And do you know what they do? Can anyone tell me? Yeah, Alex? That's right. Your red blood cells are called erythrocytes. Erythrocytes. But they are used to carry oxygen. And the reason they make up the bulk of the cells in your body is because in your blood is because carrying oxygen is an extremely important task. It's kind of the main task of your blood. So the plasma of your blood is there to make sure it flows. It's got to be a liquid. The white blood cells are there for defense, and that's very important. It's no good being a multicellular organism if things can just come in, infect you, and kill you. So you've got to have a defense mechanism to keep your cells safe. But the main business of doing is doing. Your body is trying to live and do its thing all day, and to do that, it needs oxygen. And red blood cells have the job of carrying oxygen. All right. And with that in mind, we are going to think now about there's one more thing. You would see some tiny little cells at the bottom, of which there really are not very many. These are by far the least common, but these are your platelets. And does anyone know what platelets do? Why, that is correct, Alicia. They are involved in the clotting of the blood. And clotting, the process of blood clotting is when you have an open wound and blood will pool there, and the platelets are cells that are designed to stick together and stick to each other and make a mesh, a solid mesh, which will close that wound, hold it together long enough for the tissues underneath to help themselves, to heal themselves, for stem cells to reproduce and to make new tissue cells that will fill that in, replace the connective tissue that's been damaged, replace the epithelial tissue that's been damaged, and properly heal up. But platelets stem the bleeding. They stop you from losing fluid, and they also stop things from being able to get in, both of which are important functions. So plasma, white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. These are the components of your blood. Knowing that these are the components of your blood, let's talk about putting it all together. We've got blood vessels, arteries, veins, and capillaries. And then we have got, sorry, I can't do two things at once. And then we've got the blood itself, the plasma, the liquid that makes it flow, the white blood cells in the immune response, and the red blood cells, which do the main thing involved, carrying oxygen. Let's talk about how that blood actually flows. And today, we're going to look at that in a schematic kind of way first, and then we'll look at a specific diagram that kind of names all of the specific parts as well. So here, we're going to do some amazing artwork, and we're going to draw a very accurate heart. But before we do, I need to clear one thing, which is when we look at this diagram, it's as if we're looking at a person. And if you look at me right now, this over here is the right side of my face. But it's going to look to you to be the left side because you're looking at me. And if you're looking at me, my right side appears on your left. And this, well, this is my left side. But it appears to you to be on the right side. So when we work with an anatomical drawing, we have to know that the right side and the left side are the opposite of what we think they're going to be because we're looking at a diagram of the person. This is called looking at diagrams in the anatomical position. So if we look at a person here, some chunky looking arms. Not like muscular either, they just looked weird. But if we look at this person here, and there is his heart, it's important to remember that this side here is actually his left side, and this side here is his right side. All right, important to remember. And with that in mind, let's take a look and see if we can diagram this out. Because the heart is right there, and if you don't know, our heart has 4 chambers. So we're going to draw a schematic of our heart with 4 chambers. And I want you to kind of go along with me like this, because we're also going to draw little openings to get into and out of the chambers. And you'll note that the heart is almost 2 totally separate sides. The right side, the top and the bottom are connected to each other. You can get from top to bottom. And on the right side, you can get from top to bottom. But there's no way to get from left to right. That's not possible because that's not the way the heart is built. This is an important thing to note. Maybe the first thing to note is that blood will flow through the heart like this. It comes in the top of the heart and comes out through the bottom layers. Now, that's not quite accurate, as you'll see when we see the real one, but you'll see. This is a good diagrammatic way to show it. So blood is going to come in the heart through the top and leave the top chambers and leave through the bottom chambers. All right. Now, when blood is coming into the heart with oxygen to send off to the body, it's coming from the lungs. So we're going to draw the lungs here because they're quite important. And when it leaves the heart, it's going to go everywhere else in the body. And I'm going to draw that as a single square, but of course, you have body cells everywhere in the body, up, down, left, and right. But that's okay. We're just trying to get the idea across here. We're not really being hyper accurate in how we draw this. This is a schematic diagram. All right, so here is how blood flow works in general. Blood comes from the lungs and goes to the left side of the heart. And it's going to go in a vein, because veins go back to the heart. And then, as we saw here, And sorry, I'm going to mention too, this is oxygen-rich blood. It's oxygen-rich blood because it's just come from the lungs, and the lungs is where the blood picks up all of its oxygen. So we're going to kind of keep track of these two things. We're going to keep track of the kinds of vessels we're going through and whether we have a lot of oxygen or a little. This is oxygen-rich blood. Now, it enters the top of the heart on the left side, and we call this the left atrium. And the atria are at the top of the heart. And they receive blood. So the left atrium receives blood from the lungs. It's going to pass blood down into the left ventricle. And this is still oxygen-rich blood because it hasn't done anything yet. We're just moving it around. So it's come from the lungs. So this is blood that has lots of oxygen in it. And it's now going to enter the bottom side of the heart, what we call the left ventricle. The ventricles are at the bottom of the heart. And they pump blood. And so when it gets there to the left ventricle, it's going to pump blood to the body cells. And keep in mind that now we aren't going through a vein because we're leaving the heart. And when we leave the heart, we go through arteries. Now, it is here where when they get to the body cells, arteries are going to split to smaller and smaller arteries, and they'll eventually split into what we call arterioles, and then to capillaries. Remember, those tiny little blood vessels. And at the capillaries, you'll get them delivering that oxygen to the cells and taking up CO2. So here, capillaries deliver O2 to body cells. And now we're getting blood that doesn't have oxygen in it anymore. This is oxygen-poor blood. Sometimes you'll see it called deoxygenated blood, and that's fine. That's a good description. I prefer oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor because it's not completely deoxygenated. It still has some oxygen, but certainly has less. And now we're going to have to send it back to the heart to get more oxygen from the lungs. And so this is going to go up. And remember, it can't go down here to this side of the heart because blood doesn't come into the bottom of the heart in the ventricles. It comes into the top. So this is going to go up. And it's going to go like that. And it's going to enter at the right atrium because, again, the atria are the top of the heart, and the atria get blood from veins. So this is the right atrium, which gets the blood back to the heart from the body. And all the way there, that trip was through veins. Not arteries, because again, arteries carry blood away from the heart, veins carry blood to the heart. This is a low pressure system, all right, way less pressure than going in an artery, because this isn't actively pumped, it's passively pumped. And then from there, that blood, still lacking oxygen, is going to go down into the pump half of the heart. The atria are for collecting blood, but the lower side, which are called the ventricles, they're the pumps. So now we go down into the right ventricle, and here from the right ventricle, it's going to pump out, and there's no way to draw this diagram without having to cross paths at one point, or if there is, I've never come across it, though maybe you have a better sense of three-dimensional space than I do, and you can figure out a way to draw it. But as near as I can tell, you always have to cross something around something else. I just don't think there's any way around it. And so now, this deoxygenated blood, this blood with no oxygen, will leave the heart. It's traveling in arteries because it's traveling away from the heart. This is being actively pumped. And it's going up, 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 up to the lungs. Now, I'm showing this as one tube, but of course there have to actually be two of them, because you don't have one lung, you have two lungs. But this is, again, just a schematic. And you can see that in the lungs, capillaries again, this time capillaries around the air sacs in your lung, which are called alveoli, don't worry about it, will start to put oxygen into the blood and take out the CO2. So capillaries deliver O2 into the blood. And so if we look at flow here from the lungs, now it will go back down through through veins into the left atrium of the heart. And then from the left atrium, it will go down to the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, it will go through some arteries now until it gets to the cells of the body, where it will go back into veins that will eventually enter back into the right atrium of the heart, down into the right ventricle of the heart, and then we will go down these veins, eventually these arteries, into the lungs. And these have to be arteries that took us to the lungs, because again, arteries go away from the heart. They're pumped under pressure. It's veins going towards the heart that are under low pressure. So there we go. This is a schematic diagram of blood flow. Now, if you look on the next page, you're going to see a detailed diagram of the heart, but we're going to do that together tomorrow. Today, we want to stick with this diagrammatic view. This can be confusing. You are going to want to kind of draw this out a bunch of times. Biology often looks like a lot of information, kind of a lot of stuff to know. And a big trick to it is, don't try to memorize it. If you try to memorize this drawing, you will likely fail because it's confusing. So instead, what you have to do is try to understand it and draw it out. So if we look here, just talk your way through it. Imagine yourself being a single red blood cell. And I'm a red blood cell, and I'm looking to do my trip. Well, the first thing I would do is I would go to the lungs. Because when I'm in the lungs, I would get oxygen. So I'm in the lungs, I get oxygen. Now I've got to go back to the heart. To do that, I'm going to have to travel through a vein, because veins go to the heart. And I'm going to come into this top half of the heart, which is called the left atrium, which is just a little receiving center. From there, I'm going to move down into this left ventricle. That's a big chamber, and that's a pump. And there, the heart's going to squeeze me, and all of a sudden, boom, I'm going to go down through an artery toward the cells of the body. When I get to the cells of the body, I'm going to end up in tiny little capillaries, which are 1 cell thick. And I'm going to surround a cell, just some little cell somewhere, maybe a muscle cell in my left foot, and I'm going to give my oxygen to that left foot cell so that it can do the job it needs to do. And then I'm going to leave those capillaries and I'm going to end up in a big vein. And that's going to go into an even bigger vein and into an even bigger vein until eventually I get back to the heart where I'll be collected at the right atrium. Now, I don't have any oxygen anymore, but that's okay because I'm going to get put into the right ventricle of the heart, which is another big pump. And when it squeezes, I'm going to go through an artery. And that artery is going to take me to the lungs. When I get to the lungs, I'll give away my CO2 and I'll be in little capillaries again around a little air sac where I can give my CO2 into the lungs and take in some oxygen so I can do the whole thing again. And that bit of practice like that, talking your way through it, is going to be important. With anatomical systems, it takes practice to get used to. There's a diagram here, and except for the fact that it has a little skip in it, which I don't love, but it's pretty good. It helps you see this. So this is the heart. And again, it skips a little awkwardly, which I don't love, but that's okay. You can see up here is the left atrium, and that's a small chamber. Blood comes into it, and that flows down into the left ventricle, where it flows in through the aorta and goes through the rest of the body. There's this one here. You know, I don't love either of those for now, actually. For now, we'll stick to the schematic. So again, when I'm back tomorrow, we'll talk our way through this. But make sure you have that drawn out and see if you can talk your way through it and explain it. Again, I don't want you to worry about the next page, which has a million names for it. First, I just want to have a good sense of how blood flow happens. And again, I don't want you to just think of this as something to be memorized. I want you to think about this as a system in your body that fills a purpose. Understand how it works. Why do you have a circulatory system? To get oxygen from the air into your lungs, from your lungs into your blood, and from your blood to every other cell in your body so that they can do what they need to do. And this system fulfills that purpose. And then think about the fact that this system requires all kinds of different cell types. You need muscle cells to squeeze to act as a pump. You need nerve cells to control the squeezing of that. You need connective tissue to hold everything in place. And if you think of the blood vessels, this connective tissue that allows them to expand and contract without being damaged. And then epithelial cells to keep them tough, to make sure that they don't rupture. So all the different cell types and tissue types, all the specialization that happens after mitotic division is an important part of this system. So I hope that makes some kind of sense. I hope this worked and that sound and video and all that good stuff functioned without a